So just by way of introduction, we have Professor Thomas Giddens joining us as Professor of Jurisprudence from Dundee Law School. His work generally transverses the critical, comics and cultural legal studies. He's author of On Comics and Legal Aesthetics and founder of the Graphic Justice Research Alliance. He's interested in the visuality and legal education. And I think I'd just like to say at this point, I feel like you've really sort of come home to a certain degree with this, Thomas. You sound like just like our kind of people, a little bit of a nerd, maybe. But Thomas is joined by his research partner, Dr. David Yuratich, who's a senior lecturer in law at the University of Exeter. David's interested in all manner of legal education and pedagogy, has undertaken a number of projects, particularly centred on public legal education, specifically working with the Supreme Court on public education and engagement and the design and creation of their MOOC inside the Supreme Court. I'll hand over to you guys to talk about moving, is it ratio to judgment? I believe you were sort of going to talk about today. Did you guys want a sort of a couple of minutes warning sort of towards the end of the 20-minute period?
Yeah,
great stuff. Fantastic. Welcome, and over to you to share your screen or do whatever you want to do. Thank you very much for your time, and over to you.
Cool, thank you. Hello, everybody. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to start and then Tom's going to finish, because one of the things we want to talk about today is kind of not just the way we developed this game and why we did it, but also the future plans for the game. Because in the lead up to COVID, we had all kinds of grand plans about its further development and marketing and getting it rolled out and used in a variety of places. And then obviously COVID struck and we couldn't play test the game. But now we can play test the game again. So we're very keen to get play testing. So I'm going to share some slides and I will begin. So what am I actually sharing though? I'm sharing this. Okay, so you should be able to see my slides, but ignore, there you go. So I'm just going to begin by talking to you about the background to this, because as Craig mentioned, Tom and I have been working on this for quite a long time. We came up with the idea of the SLSA conference in Lancaster in like 2016, possibly 2017. So it's been in there for a long time. Our idea was to try to do something that wasn't just gamification, in that we felt that gamification is often used in a way that it can be used as an umbrella term to refer to the kinds of projects like the Brilliant Escape Room we just heard about and things like that. But it's also something which we can distinguish usefully from the concept of game-based learning. And the idea here is we're taking it from the field known as serious games. So there's this big field of study called serious games, which is about using games, whether those are specifically created games or not, to deliver specific learning objectives and to take advantage of the kinds of things that games make you, let's start that sentence again, takes advantage of the kinds of intellectual, structural demands that games place on people in order to help them develop new ways of thinking about problems and in order to actually have this kind of phenomenological approach to their learning. So in the similar way that you might be playing a video game, which you start to intuitively understand and grapple with the internal, possibly quite complicated rules of that video game. And then you start to play in that kind of safely constructed environment with those rules. And in the end, you actually end up learning a great deal about particular subjects. So Craig, for example, has written something about The Witcher 3, right, and ethics and the way that the ethical choices in The Witcher feed into that. And there's people that have used games around kind of military games. And there's quite a lot in this about how that can be used to teach and educate people about legal and moral implications of warfare and things like that. So we thought, let's take all that theory and let's try to apply it to common law reasoning, because that is something that our students need to understand. It's also a potentially difficult to grasp set of concepts initially. It's a new, different language. And if we can try to recreate key elements of using the common law and thinking about how judgments are formed within a game-based system, we can kind of create that space for students to kind of play with those ideas and develop and visualize what they're doing. So there is a much more articulate, I've been looking at it this morning, it's surprisingly articulate, version of all of that and the theory behind it, why we targeted common law reasoning, and how the initial iteration of the game worked after we play tested it with students at a number of universities. And you can read all about it in The Law Teacher. So The Law Teacher is an article that I wrote called Ratio, a Game of Judgment Using Game-Based Learning to Teach Legal Reasoning. If you're interested in the theory behind it, look at that. It's a very good article. But I'm here today to run through with you how the game plays, what its key features are, and as I said, to talk about the future. So the basic shtick of the game is this. It is a card game. And students are each playing as a judge. And their role is to respond to a particular fact about somebody called Sam and make a judgment about Sam's fate. So you can see here on the next slide, they have these cards called fact cards, and they have a number of kind of fun legal scenarios on there. So the idea that, Sam keeps all their old computer games in case they become valuable. Sam grew up in a small rural town. Sam's an avid fan of blockbuster action movies. So there are these general facts about Sam, which students can respond to when they're making their judgments. They might be saying, okay, Sam's an avid fan of blockbuster action movies, and what's happened is the case is about Sam taking this a bit too seriously and running into the local video shop to try to, set fire to it like Bruce Willis. So there's this kind of basic hook. You've got these fact cards, and this is theoretically what students are responding to. You are dealt a hand of cards, and each turn you pick cards and you discard your hand down to 3. And you put cards in front of you like a typical kind of card game. So you've got your hand of 3 cards. You take some cards, you play them in front of you, you take more cards up to 3, and you go around the room. The goal of the game is to establish a judgment, and you do that by piecing together an authority card. So there are these yellow cards called authority cards, and each card has a particular number of points attached to it. So you can rely on a case authority, a leading case, which is a more valuable, scores more highly case, a statute or academic authority, which is kind of the weakest form of authority. So from the very beginning, we're trying to get students to think about, when you're forming a judgment, what are judges and lawyers relying upon? What authorities do they use? And within the kind of system we have, which authority is better and why might that be? So in a classroom setting, you could use this to explain why, well, academic authority is only worth 1 justice point, but a big leading case is worth 5. Why might that be? Is that universally applicable rule? So students need to make sure, the players, I should say, need to make sure that in their hands they have an authority card. You can add value to your cards, to your judgment, by adding one of these modifying cards. So for example, your judgment might be one that is in the public interest, and so it's worth more justice points. It has greater value than a judgment which is not in the public interest. You might say that your judgment is based on policy, in which case you can say it doesn't need an authority card in order to be played, and so on. So we've got these kind of series of cards you use to modify your judgment cards, your judgment pile. So what you're doing, just to clarify, you're picking up cards and you're putting them down in front of you, forming a hand. So anybody who's, I'm assuming many of you, you're all familiar with the idea of playing hands in card games. There are also cards that other players can use. As you go around the table, you can play cards on other people to affect or modify or undermine the judgments they're trying to make. So, for example, you might say that somebody has misapplied the law in which case you can remove part of their judgment and make it a non-valid judgment. You might say that the case they're relying on has been overruled. Now, you can do that if you have a card in your hand that makes you an appeal judge. So again, this is kind of talking about the court hierarchy, when courts can and cannot overrule decisions and so on. So all of this can be used to prompt much bigger conversations in the classroom, or it can just be a fun game. So we've been tinkering a bit with the order of play. And what we're saying at the moment is that whenever you have the ability to put down in front of you an authority, an argument, and an application card. So I've not mentioned those cards yet. In order to have a valid judgment, you also have to show that you are applying that authority to a particular set of arguments. You will say, I have a judgment, you put it down, the judgment is in play, and it's up to others to undermine that judgment or to produce a higher scoring judgment of their own. And at the end of the round, somebody will win, somebody will have a valid judgment or a higher number of points. So we're visualizing those elements of a judgment, getting players to understand that a valid judgment needs an argument, it needs an application, and it needs an authority. And then the fun is that the player can say, right, okay, this is what I think is happening about this particular set of facts, and this is how it applies to my judgment. And you then have that kind of fun Cards Against Humanity, kind of bucket of doom, kind of extemporizing that makes the game a little bit more fun. So these are just some examples of what judgments might look like played in front of you. So this is a particular kind of argument. Here, the player has got a leading case authority, and they've backed that up with 2 arguments, which are both worth 2 justice points. And they've backed this up here with the idea that this is a settled argument. So it's another card that is quite a rare card. It's a more powerful version of an argument card. They have distinguished their judgment from some other case. They have applied all of this to the facts. They've got a special card that says they have practical expertise, which means they cannot be accused of misapplying the law. It's another one of these pink cards. And this is their judgment, and this is a very high scoring judgment. And you can see by playing this, developing those elements physically in your hand, you're kind of embodying that sense of what a judge is and what they're doing to physically create a judgment. Idea. I am notoriously quite bad at explaining the rules of the game, but hopefully you do have a sense there of what's happening. We're going round a circle, we're picking up cards and we're putting them down, and those cards can form a judgment, or they can harm somebody else's judgment or even prevent it from being valid, because we require you to have an authority, an application, and an argument card. This final picture is something we're working on, which is, we think it would be really good if players took on personas of judges. And if these judges had certain particular styles that gave them extra points or allowed them to do special fun things. Initially, these were based on real people. But we decided not to do that. In the case it becomes a bit too controversial. For instance, Justice Jazzcat was originally Lord Denning, and the value of this justice is that they can always make a policy judgment, which means they can make a judgment without a proper case authority or a proper authority of any kind. So I'll pass over to Thom now, I think. Thom can talk more about the personas because he's very much driving this, and our future plans with the game, because one of the key things about this game is the more you play it, the better it gets. So Thom, go talk, Thom.
Cool, thanks, David. Yeah, so hopefully from David outlining, you got a basic handle on the kind of core mechanics, right, which is that they're using cards to emulate the kind of building blocks of legal reasoning. And yeah, so the kind of next steps that we're kind of looking at, so we've actually earlier this week just got back a big box from the printers of printed versions of the game, which we've renamed It's now called Judge, because we thought Judge was maybe more easily accessible to a wider audience. Okay, so partly what we're hoping to do with this is to get it picked up. This is the dream, to get it picked up by like an actual games publisher. So it being accessible to a kind of a wider non-specialist, non-law student audience was important. So the concept of it being called Judge, and you inhabit the kind of judge and make judgments, I think I've not encountered a game that emulates judging in quite the same way. So we're hoping that we'll be able to find a niche for it. And so in terms of its kind of legal education applications, the idea is that once the game, so we've got these versions done, and we're now going to start a round of play testing with our own students, and possibly with a few other institutions as well, to get the mechanics working effectively and make sure the game is robust and works as an enjoyable and fun game to play. So I think we've managed to emulate the building blocks of legal reasoning quite effectively within what we've done with the cards and the authority reasoning application, and then the bonus cards and things as well. So the thing we really are working on now is getting the game to play effectively. So playtesting is our next step. We're hoping that it will be robust enough that we can take it to the Board Game Expo and get it in one of their playtesting pits and just play it with random people there to kind of really get as much feedback as we can on the way the game plays. And then once we've got it sorted, hopefully find a way to get it picked up by a publisher. Just mythically, that's just going to happen. We're going to wish it into existence. So that will be wonderful when that just magically happens. And then the kind of model that we're thinking of is that we can have the base game, which just kind of works as a game that would be anybody can play that, which is also then useful for like thinking of like impact case studies, because then we can think about the kind of wider impact of the game beyond education. But then also to develop like a teacher's pack, okay, a legal education pack that we would write to go along with the game, so we can get some. The idea is like ideally we like get some funding to buy back like a load of games from the games publisher, and then we can distribute those to law schools along with the legal education pack, which would explain the kind of thinking behind the game, ideas of how to use it in class, different conversations that you might be able to have around it. Because one really interesting thing about it, I think, is that because of the way it works, it can be used with like introductory law courses and like first year law students to kind of think about dissecting a case and how legal reasoning works and how judges make decisions. But also it can be used in more advanced classes to kind of like a jurisprudence class, for example, to query or interrogate the kind of structures of legal reasoning and the kind of forms of logic and why they're authoritative, and different elements like that. It can also be used to like diagram particular cases, right? So if you're trying to explain a particular case, then you can kind of say, well, this is the case that they used, this is the arguments that they used, and this is how they made the decision. So you can kind of diagram the kind of key reasoning or the ratio within leading cases using the cards as well. So there's like different kind of applications that it has beyond just gameplay. So that's, I think, kind of roughly where we are. So we're kind of we're restarting the playtesting cycle now because we've developed and tinkered with the game quite a lot in terms of its mechanics since before COVID. So as David's explained the kind of basic mechanics of it, but the one thing we've added in is like an idea of resources, right? So when you collect your cards, then your arguments and your authorities you put down in front of you and you collect those turn on turn, and then you keep some cards secret, but you're only allowed 3, so you're quite limited in terms of the cards that you can keep, which are the ones that you can use to counter other people, and things like application cards that you need to kind of build your own judgment. So then once you've amassed enough resources, then they're kind of public for everyone to see, and then you can try and make your judgment. So it kind of emulates a bit of legal research as well, and We've got judicial assistants, which are like perk cards that you have in front of you. So we've got two. We've given them names and aspirations, and the judicial assistants, you can use them to kind of destroy other people's research, or to kind of steal cards from other players' hands and like that as well. And you can be an appeal judge, which enables you to overrule cards, and you can have up to 2 of those. And when you have more authority, then you can overrule leading cases, and you can overrule other judges who are trying to overrule and stuff. So we're trying to build in a lot of back and forth and a lot of kind of tactical play within the game, which we've been tinkering with that over the last year or so during COVID. And now we've got a more developed version that we're going to be play testing, and hopefully it will actually be fun to play rather than just like nerdy law stuff, but actually fun game as well. Yeah.
I can promise you that my students, when they played this when I was doing the article, did find it fun. They told me it was fun. So that must be true. I think we're out of time, but yeah, there you go. That's us. That's me and Thom and our silly fun game.